What's up, everybody? How's it going, everybody? Coach Edwards here. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Really appreciate that you're here on a Tuesday evening, wherever you are in the world. From all my East Coast folks, it's getting kind of late. I know bedtime's coming. For all my Instagram guys, I don't know if I don't think I'm making an Instagram here. What's going on here? What's going on with my Instagram? Come on, folks. Post, story, reels. I don't know. Maybe I won't do Instagram tonight. Oh well, so bad. But then I only got one camera to focus. So hey, everybody, welcome. I really appreciate everybody that's here. Like I said, happy Thanksgiving, happy countdown to Christmas. Christmas, WTF? Like, are we already like? I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm excited for this year just to be over. Like, Merry Christmas, right? But greetings to all our athletes. We've got athletes who are finally over in Europe. We've got athletes who are, some of my athletes are still stuck in North America. Love you guys. Big hugs, right? Big coronavirus hugs or elbow bump. Like, what are we supposed to do now? Like, I don't know how I'm supposed to touch people anymore. Um, but a lot of my athletes are just gearing up for January when all hell breaks loose and hopefully high schools get their act together. But anyway, wherever you are in the world, to all my parents out there, big coronavirus hugs. Love you guys because I know you're stressing out just as much as your kids are. And that's not easy. But listen, a little shameless plug. Christmas is coming. It's a great time to get a copy of my book. All right, for your athlete, right? So, if you're looking at your screen, check it out on Amazon, An Athlete's Guide to Winning in Sports and Life. I wrote this book about 2 years ago, and we hit number 2 in sports psychology when we launched. I'm really proud of that because I'm not a classically trained sports psychologist, so it was awesome to kind of stick it to all the sports psychologists out there. Love you guys anyway, not to be violent, but I'm a competitive dude. All right. And then listen, if you've got an athlete and I'm not yet working with you, I want to work with your athlete, right? And so the best way to do that is to just book a call. And so go to athletespecific.com/call. And why not give the gift of mental performance for your athlete? Because you're going to spend all this money on like gear and stuff and tournaments and travel, and I make all that stuff more valuable. I'll be honest. That's my shtick. That's what I'm sticking to. So if you've got an athlete out there with big dreams, and you guys as a family are all in on those dreams, I want to work with you guys. Okay, and so I've got a couple different programs. It's not cheap, I warn you, but it's awesome, right? And I want to see your athletes succeed, right? And also, I want to see your athletes succeed not just in sports but in life, because really that's what's most important. So let's not be silly about that. All right. So athletespecific.com/call. So yeah, got a lot of cool stuff to talk about today. So got some really good questions this week. A little bit of new format, right? So moved this to Tuesday, 8:00 Eastern. So it's been fun. I've been reaching a new audience, and the recordings of this that go out, people are seeing a lot of this like after the fact, which is great. So if you've got a coach or an athlete or a parent who needs to hear some of the topics I'm covering, please share this with them. Okay. For those of you guys who are members of our private Facebook group, Raising High Performance Athletes, if you're in the group, you can't share from the group, but if you're on my page, you can share all this stuff and whatnot. So, and we've got the podcast up at on iTunes as well. So I want to check that out. So really excited to get some stuff over. Kelly Sever, no touchy. Yeah, no touchy. COVID's ruined all that. How did we ever get by with it without COVID? So got a great question from and I didn't do my banners yet. Holy smokes. Too much technology, guys. I apologize. Let's get this set so you guys can all see it and I can remember what I'm doing later. Show that. All right. So first question tonight. For a lot of you guys listening to me right now, you probably feel pretty serious about your sport. For a lot of my parents out there, I think as parents, we're always perpetually in this mode that we want our athlete to be doing more, right? And I have to try really hard to remember like what I was doing at, my athlete's age, my kid's age. I talk to my mom every once in a while and ask her like, hey, what was I doing when I was this old or that old or whatever? Was I focused, or was I on the couch, or was I like, obviously we didn't have the techno wizardry of our phones to distract us from absolutely everything. But with that has come a lot of really cool things too. So I don't want to dismiss that. But the question that I want to start off with tonight was like, when should you start getting serious about your sport? Okay. And so I got a question This is from Sarah in New Hampshire. And she wrote, Dear Jonathan, our son is working with a local sports psychologist who says that our son, who is 14, should take it easy and take some time off this year. But we're thinking as a family that he should actually get more serious about baseball and really go for it. So again, if your athlete is not a baseball player, this is still applicable to whatever sport you're involved in. Um, so yeah, but we're thinking as a family that he should actually get more serious about baseball and really go for it this year. We don't necessarily agree with this sports psych and are looking for second opinions and would love your thoughts. Thanks for your time and really enjoy your podcast, Sarah B in New Hampshire. So Sarah B in New Hampshire, thank you for this is an email. So if you guys have a question for me, you want to email me, coachedwards@athletespecific.com is my email. Or if you've got me on Facebook, you can always send me a message on Facebook. But this was really cool because I've covered this topic a lot lately. And listen, as a person who has coached young athletes, right? And full disclosure, I got ripped on by some dad whose kid I coached like 5 years ago. And I remember this kid, and he was a nightmare. I'll cover that in a different Facebook Live, but I think about this a lot because uh, it's easy as an adult with adult thoughts to look back on our past. And Scientific American did an article years ago on and published a report that basically our memories of our past, like 50% of them are wrong. The problem is you don't necessarily remember which 50% was wrong. So as a coach, I have to remember sometimes I have to remind myself, and I have to really work hard to go like, well, what would I be like if I was that athlete right now? Now I have the pleasure of doing what I do, coaching athletes like in a variety of sports, to see different athletes of different caliber, right? Different sports. But across the board, I will say that like every parent thinks that their kid should be working harder and being more focused. But I believe wholeheartedly that comes only with being an adult, right? Because we have adult responsibilities and we have adult concerns and we have adult experiences. And a lot of times what happens is um, we go back to our thinking about our past and immediately thinking of what we could have done better, right? And I know I do. And it's hard because I'll start off by saying this too. Like I'm not a coach who believes in the fact that sports should be fun, right? Because and so let me preface that. I don't use the word fun, but I do use the word enjoyable. Right? I do think that for our athletes, if sport isn't enjoyable, it takes a really high level of discipline and drive and personal drive to stick with something that doesn't feel enjoyable. And enjoyable is relative, right? Like enjoyable is completely relative. What is enjoyable to me may not be enjoyable to you. Um, I remember being an Olympic athlete in the training center, competing in the sport of luge, talking to athletes that were like canoe kayak, like every summer right before the Summer Olympics, the canoe kayakers would come to Lake Placid and train, and we would look at these guys who could do like reps of 100 pounds between their legs doing pull-ups, and we were like, why can't I do that? Like I need that. But we also would look at the triathletes and go like, man, you guys are nuts. And they'd be like, no, you guys are nuts. And you're like, wait, what who's nuts? Like we don't know. But the point is that the there's a lot of relativity in sport. Like again, what's enjoyable to me may not be enjoyable to you. um, and and um, and we've got to, when it comes to our athletes, we want the best for them, right? We want the most for them, we want the best for them. And as adults, we think that they should be just doing more, like just whatever it is, just do more, um, so before I got a chance to go to the Olympic Training Center when I was about 15 years old, that was the first time I got invited to the Olympic Training Center. Um, I had been playing like 3 sports a year, right? So at my schools, I got a chance to do soccer in the fall, ice hockey in the winter, and then field lacrosse was my other sport in the spring. And and I did a little basketball, like I think in 5th grade, whatever. And and yeah, like with where my school was, like we basically did sports every day after school, right? And then we had games like Wednesdays and Saturdays, and Sunday was off. But until I went to the Olympic Training Center, I didn't really know what it meant to be fully committed to your sport. And so I know I covered this a little bit last week. I got a question from a mom asking like, how much time the kids should devote to their sport. But this is a little different because the idea is that it gave me a perspective of what it meant to train full time. Now, what I find really interesting is that across the United States, between the United States and Canada, the idea of what is too much is relative. And so when I moved to Canada, going on like 20 years now, uh, the when kids were playing like soccer like twice a week and maybe a game on Saturday, oh God, that was so much. Like so much to people. Like say, and even in hockey too. For those of you guys in the States that think hockey players play in Canada play like 8 days a week, they don't. And a lot of that is because ice time is hard to find. But kids who love the sport obviously just kind of play and they'll play on ponds and things like that. But it's not as much as you think, right? It's not like, and Canadians don't live in igloos either. That's also a myth. But we do drink Tim Hortons. And so the idea here is though is like having some perspective on what is full time, and um, the concept to me when I had been going to private school and playing basically my sport, whichever it was, like 6 days a week, right, every day after school for 2 hours, games on Wednesdays and Saturdays, Sunday off. That felt like a lot, but when I went to the Olympic Training Center, now it was like 6 days a week, but it was like all day. It's like you got up and you had a training session and then you had a break and then you had a snack and then you went back out and you did something else and then you had lunch and then you had like a nap and then you went out and you did something again. And then after it was all over, we went and played on the frozen lake and we played like tackle football, like in the snow, right? That was full time. And then what was interesting was that school became like a 3 hour window every day where you tried to keep up and do it on your own. Now, many years later, like back then, homeschooling wasn't really a thing. Now, because of COVID, we're all homeschooling. I don't know about you, but my kids this week started full on homeschool. So we're like all in the house. And and when homeschooling became in this concept that became more and more popular, it was realized you could compress school in about 3 hours a day. Like you could just get it done. And then you had all this other time to do something that you love to do. And so the idea here was like, well, how much time do you put towards your sport? And what I find really fascinating, again, is it's all relative, right? It is all relative to your values and your goals. What I remember, though, primarily about all the time spent, and for Sarah in New Hampshire here for her son, right now, school, because he's in a public school takes up this massive chunk during the day. And a lot of that is because school has become like daycare for a lot of families. It's this idea like mom and dad go off to work and then they at least know their kid is somewhere doing something productive, and then they have sports after school, and sports takes up a couple hours, and that's it. But the idea of flipping that and saying like, well, sports could take up all this time. um, this sports psychologist that told Sarah that her son should take time off, what was really interesting to me was as I kind of dug in this conversation with her a little bit, is that the idea that the sports psychologist doesn't have doesn't have an experience like being involved in sport full time, right? And so that's a big deal. Um, Again, people will value they will prioritize what they value most. And so for the sports psychologist, they always valued school. They weren't necessarily a really high caliber athlete. For me, I have that experience being like a full-time athlete and cramming school into that. So we're opposite ends of the spectrums here. What and going back to where I started here, like sports needs to be enjoyable. So for Sarah's son, baseball is enjoyable. He's tired, he's fatigued, but when you dig a little bit, he's not tired and fatigued because he's like tired physically. He's exhausted mentally because of what's gone on with all this COVID stuff, right? And he's frustrated and those things. What happens when sport becomes frustrating is like you really got to dig and understand like, well, what about this is frustrating? Are you not recovering as fast? Are you not eating well? Those sorts of things. That's one issue. But if you are just frustrated because you're not in the regular scheme of things, to me, my recommendation to Sarah was like, her son doesn't need time off. He actually needs to play, And so when sports, this is what's really interesting is I get this question a lot, is like, well, what about burnout for my kids? I'm going to cover that in a second, but I want to use burnout as a transition into here, as when I remember back to when I was going to school and I was playing sports and I was off to Lake Placid to train, was that experience still had all stresses, the stressors of kind of your normal everyday experience. There were still older kids that I played against who were bullies, right? There were there were older boys who thought, I sucked and told me that, right? And there were older kids who were like cocky and they were the cool kids, and they were good in other sports, but like, so that the sports maybe that I was playing with them wasn't their primary sports. And I remember specifically we had a lot of kids who were really good ice hockey players, and so when they played soccer in the fall, that was their secondary sport. We also had a kid who was a world-class tennis player, I remember, um, who who I played with, and soccer was their secondary sport. Same went true for like lacrosse in the spring. These guys were coming off their winter sport, and so you're in that situation and you want to be really good, like at so for me, field lacrosse was my big thing, like in the spring. I wanted to be an All-American. I wanted to go, and I wanted to play in college, but I was surrounded by kids that wasn't their thing, like that. And so for me, if I was doing extra training, if I was going to Lake Placid to train at the Olympic Training Center, that was so much to them. Like, oh my God, you're crazy. That's so crazy. What I'm here to tell you is that, like, there's no such thing as burnout, but there is such thing as under-recovered. You may have heard me say this before, right? So, um, this idea here is that when Sarah in New Hampshire says, like, they're trying to decide, like, if they really want to go for it, what they're comparing themselves against is usually the people local to them, like their immediate teammates, their immediate like school friends, their immediate families, and making that decision. Like for me, I got serious about sport in like kind of grade 8, grade 9. I got invited to the Olympic Training Center when I was a grade 9, which is late, comparatively now to a lot of kids. But but I was at the time, I was not necessarily like a really great athlete. Like I still felt I had all this work to be done. Making that decision to go to Lake Placid, while it seems like big and kind of crazy to some locally, to me it was no big deal because I had my own experience. They didn't have that experience, and so as a family, you have your experience. Like you have your relationship with your athlete in your house. If things are stressful or if you can really go for it, right? So this is a lot of times where a family needs to trust their gut and trust their athlete and go like, okay, what are we doing here? Like, why are we doing this? And so I wanted to transition into this idea of, when in your household, if your athlete says that they want to, like, maybe they want to play in college or they want to go pro or they want to go to the Olympics, whatever it is, right? And whatever age that happens, the idea is do you commit to that or not? And this is where a lot of parents, I find, are quick to kind of throttle things back when their athlete like really is ready for more. And what happens is the parents get stuck in kind of comparison mode with their immediate friends. Now, this is why I love when parents come together and there's a really good core group of parents with a team, because that can really solve a lot of ills. Like, and so for Sarah up in there in New Hampshire with baseball, they have that. They've got a group of parents where it's good, and it's a fun time on those in those bleachers and in their lawn chairs, down the foul poles, that sort of thing. But what I wanted to do, what I wanted to tell Sarah here, and what I wanted to tell for all of you listening who's got an athlete, is like, you're probably thinking too small. And what I mean by that is that most athletes think that, oh, well, once they get to the next level, then they're take it more serious. Or, once they get to high school, then they'll take it serious. Or once they make that other team, then they'll take it serious. Whatever it is, it's a backwards approach. in my opinion. And what happens with that approach of kind of going like, when I get to the next team, then I will get more serious, is that we lose more athletes that way who could have been really good than if we go the other way, which is thinking big and backing and coming from there, and so adopting those habits. So I just wanted to pull this up. I did some I did some looking around, and I found this. Where is it here? Did I lose it? No. Oh no, I lost it. I did lose it. Sorry, guys. Oh no, there it is. So I was looking up like this concept of most seasons played, and not sure why that ad at the bottom is in Japanese, but whatever. When an athlete thinks big and thinks like they're going to have a long career, so over the years when I've heard like athletes, and I pulled up this, it's on the screen now. I looked in for baseball, like the baseball's players that had the longest seasons ever or the longest careers ever. Nolan Ryan, who's at the top, played for Baltimore famously, played 27 seasons in the major leagues. Now, it doesn't matter what the sport, if you dig for like the athletes that played the longest and you look for some interviews with them, what you'll find is they will all talk when they're asked that question of like, hey, did you expect to have a really long career? They'll say no. And they'll say that they wish they had done certain things earlier. So there was a guy, a hockey player in Toronto who played, a guy named Gary Roberts, who had a very long career. And Gary now has a strength and conditioning facility in Toronto, works with young up and coming hockey players. But, he got to be concerned about like his body and his diet very late into his career when he kind of felt like, oh, I could keep going, right? But he also talks openly about the fact that if he had adopted those principles at a younger age, he might have even had maybe a more successful career and perhaps maybe even a longer career. Like in the NFL, when we look at Tom Brady, we have the same thing going on with him, is that we're seeing an athlete who's basically extending their career. And the question is like, well, what if he had done those things when he was younger? This is the same thing that goes for Sarah in New Hampshire with her baseball player. It's that if his attitude, if their focus is more like, how do we have a long, successful career as a baseball player? Then what happens is you start to adopt habits, right, that make that happen. And so this is something that I encourage all my families to do, is go like, all right, listen, focus, shift your focus from not just making the junior national team or making the senior national team next year, or like making one Olympics. Like, what would happen if you were like what habits would you need to adopt to be the greatest athlete in your sport? What a lot of people don't do is give themselves permission to think that big. And that's unfortunate, because I think what ends up happening is you end up kind of like, I envision it's like you're being like dragged on a board, like a surfboard behind a truck, and you're bouncing along the dirt, and it's a really bad ride. But the idea is if you just kind of soar for, like, it's a much better experience, right? It's a much better, you make better decisions. And so what's really fascinating to me is the goals that your athletes set is really sets the tone and answers these sort of questions. So instead of coming to someone like me or going to like a local sports psychologist and going like, hey, what should we do with Jimmy? He's kind of looking like kind of tired. To me, that athlete is thinking really small, because most athletes I find are not burned out. They might need a little bit of a rest, but they don't need to like take a season off, especially at 14, when they're in the middle of like their most hormonal gifts, let's call it. Like, Mother Nature's gifting your athlete in those ages, like, hey, work real hard now, and you're going to set yourself up for life, because we're giving you all the hormones and all of the recovery aids that you wish you could have like the rest of your life. And so a couple like kind of sad stories I want to share with you that maybe kind of hit this home a little bit. um Travis Roy, who some people who play hockey will know this story, but Travis Roy played for the BU Terriers in Boston. This was back in like 1995 or 1993, and And Travis Roy, he died this last year at like 45 years old. But tragically, 11 seconds into his like first shift as a collegiate hockey player at BU, he rushed into the corner, he got tripped up, and he fell into the boards and he got paralyzed. So his first ever shift in college hockey. And I had been told this, um, and I had been told this years ago, so I haven't been verified the story, but the story I always heard was like Travis's dream was always to play college hockey, and he did. And so people would think like, oh, that was a freak accident, that was unfortunate. But the older I get, and the more I read about kind of, you get what you expect, and like attracts like, and things like that. The idea was like possibly the dream for a guy like Travis. That was the dream. The dream was to play college hockey, and it happened, and then boom, it was done. Now, in a similar story, I worked with a hockey player in Canada a number of years ago his dream was to play junior A hockey. And that was just his dream. And so what happened was like it was so hard for that dream to happen. Whereas I was always encouraging this kid to like dream well, if you were an NHL caliber prospect, what would you need to be like? How would you need to train? What would you need to make happen? But what happened to this kid was like junior A was just the benchmark that he could only see. And his dad had played junior A, which is a big deal in Canada. Like playing junior A hockey is a big deal. And I think they make it too much of a big deal in Canada, but it's like this benchmark. Where it's like, oh, if you play junior A, like, man, this is great. But no, like the deal is to have like a long, successful career as a professional hockey player. And when you think like that, then junior A just happens along the way. And tragically for this athlete, like in his first game, he broke his leg, like his first game. But did he play junior hockey? Sure did. And so you might call that like unfortunate, like bad luck, or coincidence or whatever. But I kind of go like, you know what, if we just think bigger, then all these other things come, they just happen naturally. So to Sarah and her baseball player in New Hampshire, my question here is like, it's not about taking a break now. It's let's think bigger, like because for a kid his age at this like they need more, not less, right? And when I go back to my Olympic experience and going like, well, training like a full-time athlete, um, for Sarah's athlete, when she kind of plugs into that way of thinking, she realized her athlete has so much more potential than he's actually showing now. And so I want that idea of getting serious to kind of really kind of sink into everybody. And I'll tell you this, your coaches wish you were more serious. Okay. And what I mean by that is that even coaching at like, I coach my son like tier 5 soccer, and I remember thinking like, people like, oh, yeah, it should be fun at this age. Not fun. It should be enjoyable because you don't send your kid to math class and go, hey, hope math is fun. No, you don't even care if math is enjoyable for your kid. You're just like, no, you're going through that and you're going to do all your homework and you're passing all your tests and do all your assignments and you can do the best you can do. And there's no question. But then we get over to sport and all of a sudden we say, well, yeah, if you want to take, if you want to take a break today, that's okay. And that always baffles me because I believe that athletes at all levels, right, at all levels can get more out of sport if they come and they just take the same attention to detail as they would to math class, right? So again, it's not fun we're chasing, but it's enjoyment because all right, listen, if it's enjoyable and you're going to practice, now you can adopt those habits that I don't care if your skill level isn't there yet. You can still have the habits of a professional athlete, right? You can do things like show up on time and have your gear washed and have your bag organized and all that stuff. And it's shocking. Like when I was doing luge, I worked with a sports psychologist who put me through this little, he asked me like, who's the best athlete in your sport? And at the time it was this guy named Georg Hackle. Hackle's now a coach of the German team. But the question was like, what do you think Hackle does for, these different aspects of his game? Now, Hackle famously drank a lot of beer. And what a lot of athletes do is they find the worst habits of their favorite athletes and then think that they can adopt those habits. And the the difficult thing here to understand is that if you're as gifted technically as the best athlete in your sport and they have a bad habit, yes, you can choose to do that habit, but also what would happen for you if you maybe toned that habit down, right? And that's really where a lot of people jump to that thing like, oh, I'm going to look for the quickest things that allows me to be lazy. It's like, no, 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 that's not the deal. You don't want to be doing that. Yes, you need to recover. Yes, you need to relax. Yes, you need to balance a little bit. But the idea here is like find the best habits of the best athletes and adopt those and see where this can go. Because you're going to get more out of your coaches. Because when your coaches know that you're invested 100%, you're going to get more out of those coaches. They're going to give you better information because they're going to see that the information they're giving you is actually going to stick. Okay. And that's really exciting. It's also, it totally shifts the attitude between the athlete and the coach. Okay. And so coaches are wired to win. Like they're designed to help you physically, technically, tactically go out and do everything you need to do to succeed if you listen to them. Okay. And so this is where a lot of athletes there'll be a handful of athletes, and every program has this. And this is really important is that your athlete, they deserve like every other athlete on their team deserves your athlete to come and be 100%, right? And to put in the time and put in the effort and be organized and and all that stuff, right? When I went to the Olympic Training Center, there was no question about what we did. It was just on the schedule every day. It was like you're gonna lift at this time, you're gonna do training at this time, we're gonna go for lunch here, we're gonna go for a hike there. Like there was no question; it was on the schedule. Like you couldn't argue with it. It was just what we did, right? And so that culture, that environment, is there. And I can guarantee you, no matter what sport your athlete competes in, is that somewhere there is an example of how the best do it. Okay. And the challenge sometimes is when your athlete is in a program where not everybody else is agreeing with that, and that's really frustrating. I was in that a lot, but the bottom line is you don't stop, you don't tone down what it is you do. You go and you get the same. You come with that same attitude, and you ask the most familiar coaches, and they're going to give it to you. Okay. Um, I also like to say that when as parents, you're investing in camps and clinics and travel to Europe and all this stuff. And when your athlete, and this can be really frustrating because sometimes parents think like, oh, I'm paying for all this stuff and my kid's not giving me 100%. I think it's okay to be honest with your athlete and say, all right, listen, what are we doing next and why? Right. Because I just had a phone call with an athlete earlier, and the parent, when you do a breakthrough call with me, and I sit down with the parent and the athlete, and the parent looked at the athlete and said, all right, listen, we're gonna invest a lot of money with Coach Edwards here. How are like what's the plan? What are we gonna get? What are we trying to get out of this, and why? And it was great because when that shift happens between the parent and the athlete owns it, because the athlete has no, like, unless your athlete has a side hustle, uh, they're selling t-shirts on on the internet, or they're working, they have no value of when no concept of value when you're shelling out $500 for a tournament, or $1,000, or $8,000 to go to Europe. They don't really understand what that means, right? They're a lot of times they're figuring out like, okay, I bought a coffee at McDonald's and that was like $3, and this is like $8,000, and that's like this many coffees. Like they're doing that in their head, right? But when you can get an athlete and a parent together and understand that, okay, listen, what are we doing next and why? Then I find as parents, you're usually happy to spend that money. With that, resources are relative, okay, for every family, right? And I've worked with athletes of billionaire parents, okay, and I have worked with athletes who are the offspring of like state employed workers. Like that's too, with all due respect there, but the idea here is that like that's an opposite ends of the spectrum. I have seen kids of billionaire parents fail. I have seen kids of billionaire parents succeed. I have seen kids of parents with less means succeed, and I have also seen kids with parents of less means also fail. So you're going to slot in somewhere there. But this is where you can make the most of this, right? You can make the most of this with the resources that you have. And those are never excuses, because somebody somewhere is doing more with less, right? So who's that with the dollar signs? Ellis Redford chimes in, he goes, people may think it, but just don't say it, especially with programs and coaches that don't have the same aspirations. True, right? That's well said, Ellis. And it goes back to my point about like how not everybody on your team is going to want the same thing you want. But at the end of the day, when you look back on this time in your life, and so for Sarah in New Hampshire, when her athlete looks back on this time in his life, he'll go like, did I work enough? Did I, all those kids maybe that I was worried about like being friends with or whatever, and I didn't want to lose that tribe. Like that can affect you. But I can guarantee you this, and every parent who listens to me knows this, is that that as time elapses, you look back on the time and you go like, I shouldn't have been so caught up. I shouldn't have been worried about what I was doing. I should have just kept going for it. Okay. And I'm here to give you permission to go for it. Okay. That's really, really important. I just want to show you this. Like, so Tiger Woods, his son, Charlie, is 11 years old. And, yeah, he's 11 years old. And did I catch this? Do I still have this up? I might have lost this one. Yeah, I did. So his son's 11 years old, and his son wants to play. I think it's called the PNC Championship. And what it is the PGA Tour puts this event on where professional golfers get to play this event with their kids or grandkids or whatever, or a family member. And at 11 years old, his son Charlie wants to play, and he wants to beat Justin Thomas, who's another professional golfer. And what I thought was really interesting about this, as I read this article, was that Justin Thomas talks that Charlie, the son of Tiger Woods, trash talks just like Tiger Woods does. And I think it's really fascinating what we're going to see here in terms of like commitment and doing and knowing and how this is all going to work. Tiger Woods' son is growing up the son of one of the greatest golfers in history. Tiger Woods grew up the son of a military vet who was not a professional golfer. He was a golfer, but he wasn't like a professional golfer. But so the son of the military vet grew up with a certain approach to the game and turned into one of the greatest golfers in history. The greatest golfer in history's son is growing up with this attitude of like, hey, this is just what we do here. And like I said, when I went to the Olympic Training Center, training full time is just what you do here. When you go back to your teams and to your programs and your schools, now you're usually inundated with all these people who are trying to do what they think is the same thing, but with far less work and far less effort, right? And for Sarah in New Hampshire there, she ran into a sports psychologist who's more prone to do less than more. And I'm here to tell you that you're probably fully capable of doing way more than less, okay? So when you make the decision to go all in, you make one decision once. You don't make 1,000 decisions 1,000 times. And so Dr. Benjamin Hardy talks about this. I don't think it's his original concept, but the idea is that when you make a decision making a decision once is easier than trying to make it every single day. And so what I told Sarah in New Hampshire is that your baseball player, your athlete, needs to make, and you as a family just need to make the decision once. Like, what are we trying to do here? Whether it's we're trying to play in college or we're trying to play pro or we're trying to go to the Olympics, make that decision once and don't vacillate, right? Don't kind of be in, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. It's like, oh, I feel tired today, I'm going to take it down. It's like a diet. If you go all in, and whether it's like keto or Atkins or you eat nothing but kale, when you're all in once and you identify with that person who gets that goal, then what happens is you're all in, and there's no question, there's no variation, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. You just identify yourself with being like a world-class baseball player or a lacrosse player or a luge athlete or a bobsledder or hockey player. When you identify as that thing, then all the other decisions are easy. Okay. All the other decisions are easy. Finding what coaches to work with, finding what equipment to buy, finding what camps and clinics to go to. That's all real easy. And it's never about winning. It's always about just the process, right? And adopting those habits, right? And like I said, I don't believe in burnout. I do believe in under-recovered. So when an athlete adopts the habits of a successful athlete who's going to have a long, successful career doing their thing, like Cal Ripken in baseball or Gary Roberts in hockey or Tom Brady in football, now you start adopting all these other habits that really keep burnout at bay, right? They don't happen. They just don't happen. If you ask Tom Brady if he's tired, he's gonna tell you, "No, I'm not tired. I'm good. Let's keep going. I'm gonna play football till I'm like 106," and he's got the habits to do it, right? But your athlete needs to just adopt those habits now, and it's not about taking a break. It's probably about doing like, how do we do more, right? And coming up with that answer. Okay, so to Sarah B in New Hampshire with her baseball athlete, thank you for the question. Good luck to you. That was fantastic. And if that's resonated with you, like if you think if you think your athlete's just a big slug, go ahead and put slug in the comments. If you think your athlete's on track, you can just leave me a little comment wherever you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, um, and give me a hot thumbs up and a high five and heart and all that stuff. That'd be really appreciated, because that puts the algorithm out there. Facebook starts to share more of this, so we got some good numbers tonight, which is great. All right. So next question is, wait, no, not. Oh, I just pasted the same thing. That's the same question I just covered. This, paste there, save that. All right. So this one is a little bit, for a lot of you, this is not going to apply to you. I'll be honest. And if you're listening to the podcast later, uh, I think it's important you hear this concept, because you never know when you might need this. Okay. So I would share something with you that I've been working on for a long time. Sport is basically an addiction. Okay. When you learn about addicts and you learn about like flow states, Stephen Kotler has a book called Stealing Fire. And let me see if I can pull it up here. I'll show it. Stealing Fire in books. There it is. All right. If you have a peek at your screen, I got it up on Amazon here. It's called Stealing Fire by Stephen Kotler. Now, I warn you, before you read this book, you should probably read a book called Becoming Superhuman. I think it's called. It's his other book. And Stephen Kotler is amazing. The Rise of Superman, this other book here. Don't get off that. All right. So so The Rise of Superman. Stephen Kotler is a phenomenal writer. He went to Johns Hopkins. He has written a phenomenal set of books, like with Peter Diamandis, and so great stuff. But the cool thing about the Stealing Fire book is that it talks about the use of, like, about dopamine, and if you another great book is called The Molecule of More, which is a fantastic book to read. Molecule of More. And there it is up on the screen. All right, by Daniel Lieberman. Great book. So when you start reading about like dopamine, and you start reading about like flow states and all this stuff, you realize like sports is just one big addiction, like literally. And we think, and like we'd say, hey, isn't this great? It's fantastic. Problem is when it's over, is that your body and your mind are going like, WTF? Like, what just happened? Like, that thing I used to do every day is now gone. It's sucked away. And you go through like literally the same withdrawal systems as like a crack addict or a heroin addict, right? And I read a great book years ago called Thrown Free. Is it on Amazon? Thrown Free? No, it's too old. It's too old. Oh my God, you get all these like Harlequin romance books when you type in Thrown Free. We'll just get off of that. That's not really cool. But the idea here is that sometimes your athlete has to make a transition. So the question I got here made me think of that, but it's going to apply to more of you than I originally thought. But so here's the question: Dear Jonathan, we're at a bit of a crossroads. My daughter is a rising junior with a promising tennis career, but is considering a switch to basketball for better college options. Any thoughts on how we should go about making this decision? From Peter in St. Petersburg, Florida. Now this is kind of cool. So the first question that I always have is, this switch is always based on athleticism, right? So if your athlete is athletic and they can make this switch, and over the years I looked up some stuff. I found this article. This is like 9 famous athletes that switched from one sport to another with varying degrees of success. uh, these are kind of fascinating. um, you'll recognize like Usain Bolt. He tried soccer, right? And why? Every coach every coach picks, no matter what the sport, picks athleticism first. Okay, doesn't matter what the sport. You see a good kid who's a good athlete, and you're a coach in a certain sport. You go, hey, you want to try my sport? Same thing happened with Usain Bolt. This happens with every 100-meter runner. It's like, oh my God, you can outrun the entire field. Well, if we can teach you how to kick a soccer ball, technical ability, then we're going to win every game, right? And it never works out. It happens every Olympics, never works out. This guy here, this was a football player, Paolo Maldini, who switched to tennis, and he lost in like 42 minutes in his first event. This was a cyclist who became a jockey. That didn't work out. Michael Jordan, famously, right, like went from basketball and he went to baseball. Now, these are all like this Chris Hoy. This is one of the, you probably don't know who this is, but Chris Hoy is like a knight. He's a Sir Chris Hoy in England. He's one of the most decorated cyclists in history. He's won like 7 gold medals, I think. Phenomenal athlete, and then he went to race car driving. Now that is a little bit different sport to sport. That soothes the competitive nature, but not necessarily the physical nature, because Chris Hoy, as a cyclist, is like got legs of like a tree trunk. But your athlete may get to a point where they may want to switch from one sport to another. And the one that I think about a lot is like football players who go try bobsled, or track and field athletes who go to football, or basketball players that go to volleyball, or, what else? In this case, for this athlete, she's a tennis player and she's thinking about going to basketball. Now, the interesting thing here is that they're going after an opportunity. Okay. One of the things you have to understand about people is that we get very tied up in our tribe. I read a really interesting article by James Clear at jamesclear.com that was basically talking about how people will forego facts to continue being part of a tribe. And with the election the way it's gone, this is really coming to the forefront, because some people are going like, dude, how are some people believing certain thing when there's facts over here that say something else, right? And I find it fascinating too. Okay. And so the idea here is that when your athlete transitions from sport to sport, if they are in one sport and they're totally sucked into that tribe. Now, for this athlete, tennis is an individual sport, right? So for her to make a switch out of that individual sport into something else is easier than an athlete who is always identified as maybe a football player or a soccer player, and they have this team of people that they've been around, and maybe they grew up with, and now they're thinking about making this leap. That can be difficult, because you can think like, hey, the grass is greener. Like, we're just going to go play basketball and then we'll get our college scholarship going on. The challenge here for this athlete is that she hasn't been playing basketball a lot, and she's a junior. There is an option here for her when she transfers, because she's been out of traditional school because of tennis, and so she's been homeschooling. But to go to a basketball team, she's actually going to enroll in a school, so she can actually go and repeat her junior year, which is something I did in high school, and now get immersed in this new tribe. But there's going to be an effort there to get in with a new group of people, and she's going to bump somebody off that team if she's that good. The interesting thing here, and we're going to talk about this in the next question in terms of, is your athlete competing in the right sport for them? One of the things to consider is size. One of the problems that this athlete is running into is she's quite tall. And it's one thing to be tall in tennis, like Maria Sharapova is quite tall in the sport of tennis, very famous tennis player uh, from Russia, although she lives in the United States. Um, for those of you guys that don't know her, this is her Wikipedia page, which is right there, and there she is. interesting. Had a little bit of a doping incident years ago, and then her career kind of went downhill. I don't think that was the cause of it. But Maria Sharapova is quite tall. She's 6'2", but I would say she's on the tennis side. She's tall. So this young girl is also quite tall. She's 6'2" as well. So she could stay in tennis, but she feels like she's not developing in a way that she's going to be world class in tennis. So she's going to go to college. So the first thing I think about is like, well, where are you going to go to school? Like, where are you going to play? What program are you going to get into? Do you have a coach there who's receptive of this change? Because some coaches aren't receptive of this change, especially at this age, and depending on which school she's going to. Now, if there's a school that like is like, hey, we're hungry for a kid like this, let's take her. Great, you're going to get great opportunities, and that's one of my recommendations. Is like if you're going to make this switch, find a place where you're going to go and you're going to play full time. I didn't realize you guys can't see my little face, my lovely face on StreamYard there. I'm kind of hidden, aren't I? That's sad. Look at me go. Now you see my face. Now you really see my face. So here's the deal. When you make a switch, right, for any sport, you've got to understand there's 3 key abilities. And if you go to 3 key abilities, so athletespecific.com/3 keys. Okay, I'll pull that up on the screen. athletespecific.com/3 keys. You will see that you'll learn that every athlete has 3 keys: a physical ability, a technical ability, and a tactical ability for their sport. So the first thing you got to consider here in this move is the tactical ability of your athlete. How are they going to do in a new school? That's a macro tactical ability. How are they going to deal with this coach and this team tactically? Right? There's other tactical things you can think of in there, but you're thinking macro, like we're trying to get this athlete from high school into college. Where's the best chance we can get her to play and to shine and to thrive, right? And then move on. Technically, all right, well, she's been playing tennis. She grew up playing basketball, so she's probably pretty rusty playing basketball. But the key is like, how do we get her up to speed technically to get to that level where she's a recruitable athlete and she can play at the next level, right? And by when, right? And so those are the first 2 abilities you got to think of. The physical ability, like I said, height is usually the first thing I think about. Okay, it's like, okay, she's 6'2", dad is actually 6'4", mom is 6 foot. So at 6'2", she's got the height to continue to play. So we don't want to put her in a sport where she can't survive. So is basketball a good switch? Yes, fine. And weight wise, she's good, right? She's not going to be too heavy, and she's not going to be too light, right? Because if she's too light, then we got to figure out physically how, like, okay, we got to get around a strength and conditioning coach, we got to get her diet in order, we got to get her changed physically so that she survives, right? Because we don't want to just turn a blind eye to that. And some people do, right? Some people turn a blind, especially with girls, and especially with physical ability, with height and weight and things like that. They go like, oh, you're fine, honey. It's like, wait a second. If she's like 40 pounds overweight, this isn't going to go very well, right? So we're just like, we got to be cognizant of those things, right? And so the other thing that you've got to consider in a path like this is like, well, can you just make this decision locally real easy? Or is she going to have to go someplace else, right? Now, for this athlete, they're in Florida. There's some good basketball nearby. She's going to stay. That's okay. But let's say you're from Idaho and you're a tennis player and you've moved to Florida and you moved to Bradenton, Florida to play tennis, which is a very popular thing to do in that world. And now you're going to go back and play basketball. Where are you going to go? Are you going to go back to Idaho? Or do you need to go to like a bigger hotbed of basketball to play and survive, right? So you got to keep those things in mind. So, transitioning from one sport to another, you just have to take into consideration those 3 key abilities: the technical, the tactical, and the physical, right? And if your athlete is high level at one and they can transition to another that is not as physically demanding, that's always a good transition. But depending on the amount of time you have, if your athlete is behind the 8 ball, that's one thing you got to consider. Going back to the bobsled analogy, just for those of you guys who might not know this at all, as a luge athlete, I went to bobsled, and it was like going from driving a Ferrari to driving a truck. It was a very easy transition to drive, technically, but physically, I was quite small. So at 5'8" and like 190 pounds, I was small and light, and so I needed to beef myself up and go. But some athletes who were like really good football players can extend their athletic career and transition to a sport like bobsled or track and field. Same thing. Willie Gault, Herschel Walker, and Edwin Moses were three very famous athletes who went to bobsled, and Herschel Walker did quite well. Was a football player, very good football player, uh, goes to bobsled, does great. So there's other options too. There's also like random options, like your athlete switches from one athlete and they go to archery or, pistol shooting, or they're a cyclist and they've got this great base of athletic leg ability and they go to short track speed skating or long track speed skating. These are options, right? These are options. So when an athlete feels like they're coming to the end of their career in one sport, they can transition to another sport, and it's quite fun. It's quite fun to see that. I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen a lot, right? So I appreciate that question, Peter in St. Petersburg. I know it doesn't apply to everybody, but it's still kind of interesting to understand. I always encourage luge athletes now that, hey, if you're an up and coming junior luge athlete and you're a good athlete, like you're a good sprinter, when your luge career is done, if you can get big, fast, and strong, you can transition into a sport like bobsled and do quite well. You still need like $250,000 in sponsorship and like four really good teammates who are like really big football dudes, and or dudettes, and you'll be good. Although we've got Colleen Foch right now, who's a CrossFit athlete, I think. Although I'm sure she's got another athletic background, but she's actually transitioning to women's bobsled in the United States. Check out her. Don't check out her. Don't check her. Check her out. Don't check her out, but just watch her. Like, it's cool. Okay. So last question for tonight, going long as always. Okay. If this is resonating for anybody, do me a favor, leave me a like or a heart, whatever. Really appreciate if you do that. Oh, gonna hide that. I'm gonna show this and transition there and go there. And so kind of in the same vein of what we are just talking about, but is your athlete competing in the right sport for them? Okay. And this happens a lot. Like, I work with a lot of goalies, and so ice hockey goalies, field lacrosse goalies, uh, soccer goalies. And what's interesting about goalies is they a lot of times come to a sport and they may not be the most athletic kid, but they love the sport. And coach goes, "Hey, like, you want to try goalie?" And what the coach is basically saying is like, "I can't put you here, here, and here, but if I put you there, because nobody else wants to do it, you get to stay on the team, and then we got a goalie. Hey," right? So that happens a lot, and so um, so I got this question. It says, "Dear Jonathan," this is from Garrett in Las Vegas. "Dear Jonathan, our son plays football and is in his sophomore year of high school. My wife and I are starting to think that football might not be the best sport for him long term. He's very athletic and wants to compete. We just aren't sure what other sports to put him in. Thanks so much for your time." So football is a pretty interesting one because, especially over the last couple of years, the concerns about concussions have really driven a lot of people from that sport. Now, I love football. I love watching football. I love the athleticism of football. I hate the concussions. When somebody goes down, I just go, it's not worth it. Like, I do. And I think that a lot about some sports. I just go, this weekend, for those of you guys that haven't seen it, if you watch Formula One racing, I'll try to pull this up on the Grosjean crash. So this ridiculous accident happened this weekend, and a Romain Grosjean basically had a crash, and his car ignited in flames, which is really rare. And I'll post it here. You guys can check it out. Can you see that? Oh. Yeah, so I'll just rewind it. So I was watching this live when this happened, and luckily he came out alive, and the technology in the car allowed him to survive. And it was freaky, but it can happen, and it just makes you go like, is this really worth it? So So I'm getting a little off topic here. Apologize, but this was just amazing. And he's all good, and his hands were burned, his feet were burned. This is kind of a good angle. This is what I was watching when it happened live. Was just kaboom. Now I was in Vancouver at the 2010 Olympic Games, working for the television when we had an athlete fly out of the track and hit a pole and die instantly. That wasn't pretty either. So I think a lot about sports, and I think a lot about safety long term, and I think about, like, do we, is it worth it? And so for football, and I've worked with football players over the years, and my advice to them is, like, if you have the body that allows you to play football and to be successful at football, like collegiately and possibly beyond, I say go for it. But there's a lot of kids who play football, and football is like, the sport they do in the fall, and they might play lacrosse in the spring, or, maybe they're, uh, or they're a skier and they play football in a little bit of the fall, and then they go off and they ski or whatever. The idea here is football worth it? And if your athlete is not a football build, I would say, uh, all right, maybe let's find another sport, because we want sport for life. We don't necessarily want sport for a little while, right? And so football is tough for that, right? But like I said, I love the sport. I love rugby too, same thing. And I like the athleticism, and I like the team, and football is like the ultimate team sport, but is it worth it long term? And for Garrett's son, his son is really athletic. And so the question here is, like, unfortunately for Garrett's son, he hasn't played many other sports. He loves football, but Garrett has a little bit of a height issue, so he's not going to be super successful in football long term. So my question here is, like, okay, in Las Vegas, there are plenty of other sports. Like, there's baseball, there's lacrosse, there's basketball. There's also these micro sports everywhere, like, things like archery and pistol shooting, and this is where the idea is, like, well, what are you trying to replicate? Are you trying to replicate community? Are you trying to replicate the athleticism? Uh, if you've got a kid who's a good athlete, then you can get them into, like, Olympic weightlifting. You can get them into CrossFit. You can get them into, or you can go a completely different direction. You can go into triathlon. I know a lot of kids who are stuck in sports where they have the mindset of an endurance athlete, but they're in a power sport. Okay, and I want to talk about that here, to just bring it to everybody. I wrote an article. I'll just pull it up on the screen. It's at athletespecific.com / the 4 elements. I'll put this in the comments. Comments will go here. All right, there's the link in the comments, so you guys can all see it. So this athlete for some reason gets a lot of traction globally. People are searching for personality elements of athletes. Now, I think what people are searching for is this idea of, like, basically, does my kid need to be a jerk to be successful? Because you see the Conor McGregors of the world, and you see who's a MMA fighter, and he's, like, cocky and brash, and people think, like, oh my God, do I have to be cocky and brash to be successful? And what I want to share with you, with your athlete, is this idea. And for more, if you check out the video, to the link, then I go really deep into this. But the idea here is, like, it's important to teach your athlete about, like, kind of the 4 elements of personality. And so for the adults in the room, you may have done this before, maybe taking a personality test for a job. If for those of you guys that are in sales, sometimes this comes up a lot. But the easiest one to explain to kids is the elements. So fire, water, earth, and air. So different sports need different elements. And also, your sport needs different elements at different times. Okay. Now, if you're a football player, and depending on what position you play, a lot of times that's fire all the time, right? So you've got to be a fiery athlete, and it's like, my fire's got to beat your fire, and if my fire is dim today, you're going to get me, and all that stuff, and that can get really tiring. Okay. Because it's really hard to maintain that level of just drive and want it. Ugh, you got to really, that's something you get really addicted to, is the fire, the adrenaline, the dopamine, all the endorphins. And then those athletes go off and then they got to party at night because they're still hyped up. They don't never learn the skills to bring it down. Something I work with my athletes, by the way. But if your athlete is basically earth all the time and they don't know how to develop fire, well, then they might struggle long term in a sport like football, right? Um, and so you may need, but let's say your athlete is more water, but they have the potential to be very strong, like earth. Well, the water approach of basically being fluid and taking energy and dealing with, they could be good in a martial art, where like taekwondo or judo. Um, and so the idea here is like, is an athlete needs to understand, like when I competed in luge, it was kind of fascinating about luge, like the start is all like fire. And then when you're sliding down the track, you're all water and air, right? Now, if you have an athlete and they're ditzy, right? And they're all air, well, they may need to learn some skills how to be more earth, or depending on their sport, they might need to learn how to be able to learn how to be fire, right? I had an athlete I worked with a couple of years ago, and this kid was an ice hockey player and couldn't, like, had no fire in him at all. He was all earth, like all earth. It's like it's like, are you alive? And this athlete, his coaches were frustrated because they're like, this kid has the physical ability to be a professional athlete. We just don't know how to get it out of him. And they used tactics like they got kind of derogatory at him to try to get him all like get him just fired up, right? They try to offend him to get him fired up, which is a tactic coaches tend to use at the very end. I've got an article or a video on YouTube about Maggie Haney, who is a disgraced gymnastics coach, and I said something in that video that offended a lot of people, but I still hold true to it. Is it sometimes a coach is trying to find a way to get through to an athlete to get them to the next level, and they may use techniques and tactics that are offensive. Does that mean they're wrong? Well, maybe the tactic is not appropriate, but for a lot of athletes, sometimes that same tactic can be appropriate. Like I remember having a coach kind of offend me a little bit, but I took it as like, all right, I'm going to show him, and I did. But I'm sure other athletes who get offended and then try it and then they fail. Now they're just pissed at the coach. I don't think that's fair. So our athlete has to morph, and our coaches are looking ways to help them morph. Sometimes the coaches don't always have the tools to do that. That's why I want your athlete to be empowered to find their own tools and to understand, like, hey, I got to fire it up today, right? We use that term. Hey, you got to fire things up today. Like, all right, listen, guys, if we're going to do this, we got to fire it up today, right? Guys and girls, doesn't matter. But other times, if the other team is fiery and they're getting up in everybody's face, or getting up in your athlete's face, well, that's where it's time for them to be a little water, right? We had an interesting post in one of my Facebook groups. This young kid was a goalie, and this kid scored on him, basically got in his face and said some things that probably should have got him tossed out of the game. But it was really interesting because some comments came in. One came in from a mom who was like, "You got to teach that goalie how to trash talk," right? And I was never really a big trash talker. I always kind of wanted to just win based off skill. But there's some athletes out there that like to trash talk, and it's just a way to either for them to get in the game or for them to put you down. But for a lot of athletes, they can take that trash talk and they can turn it to help them. When they receive it, it's not necessarily getting fired up and getting fired back. It's more being water, taking that fire from that athlete, kind of almost sucking it out of the life out of them, and using it to good. So for this athlete, for Garrett, as they're trying to find their athlete, find a sport for their athlete, you're trying to find a match personality wise, but you're also trying to educate your athlete on, like, listen, you can take your athletic ability, and if we just help you understand that you can morph your personality for certain situations, you could be really successful in this sport, right? Or in, or maybe in that sport, right? Um, uh, I share with you how I like Formula One racing, and I know to get into that sport, obviously it's ridiculously expensive. I mean, it's incomprehensible for some people how expensive it is, but go-karting is an entry level into that. And I had a luge athlete years ago. I knew a guy who had a son who's a luge athlete, and really good luge athlete, but was also a really good go-kart racer. And in go-karting, it's a different set of skills. Luge is basically a full body, all-encompassing experience. And this athlete, when you're just pushing some pedals and moving and shifting gears and moving the steering wheel, that was better for him, and it suited his personality. And he went on, had a really good career as a go-kart racer. Go-kart racer, pardon me. So you've got to understand what your athlete needs to do. So for this particular athlete with football and with a risk of concussions, and I'll just reiterate, if you have the body to survive a sport like that and take it to the next level, and what I mean by that is like you're minimally going to be like 5'10" and up, and you're going to be 165, 180 pounds shredded. And you're fast and twitchy, you could probably find a position to play in football. Or if you're like a monster, if you're like 300 pounds and you're 6'4", there's a place for you in the sport of football. You just have to weigh the concussion risks in your own family and see what's up with that. And I think only time will tell. I do think the pendulum has swung very hard on the concussion fear side. When I've talked to athletes in rugby, in the sport of rugby, while the concussion rate is really high, there's some athletes in rugby that never get concussions, which is kind of mind-boggling when you think about it, because they're I think it's 4 times more likely to get a concussion than a football player is. So that's pretty interesting to understand. So, but if your athlete is looking for community, then you're going to want to find a sport where there's that community is filled, especially if they're a social athlete. If they're and Ellis Redford writes, "I'm all fire, interested in what a lacrosse goalie should be in this analogy." The question is, yeah, so that's a great question, Ellis. So for an athlete who is reactive, okay, and for lacrosse goalies, lacrosse goalies are reactive. Luge athletes, to just give you an example, because I know I'll have a lot of luge people watching this because I've got a kind of a bit of following in that sport. Luge is reactive, but it's also predicted. Like you're figuring out if you're going to be like there's a path you're trying to go on. As a goalie, you're trying to react to everything. Now, what's interesting is that there's some goalies who are unflappable, right? Like they would talk, and there's some athletes who play esports and who game, and you watch them, and they look like they're almost catatonic. So their external approach might be earth, right? The way they describe how they play might be air. They might be just kind of like, whatever. But when they play, they're actually very twitchy. And to me, that's a bit fire, right? Now, there's times in a game, in a situation where your reactivity must be fire, but your demeanor needs to be water or earth, right? If you're in a combat sport, there's times when you are attacking your opponent. Well, that's all fire. But there's times when your opponent is attacking you and you need to be water. You need to be able to like take that energy and move it. So if your personality is all fire and you go over the deep end, like I am more fire at my core. And at 48 years old, I'm trying really hard to learn how to just kind of tone that down a little bit, especially when I work with athletes in a live situation, right? Because I can get fired up too, and I'm doing a lot to kind of work on that, right? Which is interesting because when I was younger, I wasn't necessarily all fire, but I was always ready to get up for the event. When I shared a story in my book, in An Athlete's Guide to Winning in Sports and Life, about a situation I had where I was competing at national championships and I was having bad results and bad races because I was too overcooked. I was waking up in the morning and I was ready to go. Like my heart rate was up. And then if I went and did my normal warm up, then my heart rate got even higher, and that was good for my start, but for sliding, it was not good at all. And luge is like the ultimate juxtaposition. It's almost like in biathlon, the sport of biathlon, where there's like cross country skiers running around, and then they've got to shoot at a target with a rifle. They actually are taught how to shoot between heartbeats. And what was interesting is years ago, the idea was the fight was that you had to control your heart rate, get your heart rate get calm down real quick. Um, and so what they did was they said, wait a second, we're stuck in fire. Our heart rate is high. How can we operate within that high fire situation, right? So Ellis writes, I've listened to you and toned down as well, especially with my daughter. So she just plays with her own instincts, avoiding that fight and flight mode. Yeah. So if your athlete is prone to being too jacked up, the question is like, okay, we got to teach them how to be aware of that, right? How to be aware of their own internal, how they feeling. Like, do you feel like anxious? Do you feel like that it's a big game and you're nervous? Well, now you got to throw a little water on that because that's not going to help you perform, right? And that's what's fascinating about sport. And I think it's a really interesting lesson to take with us for the rest of our life. But the idea is like if you're fired up, if you're jacked up, and then like the ref makes a bad call and you're like offended by that, like literally, um, that's when we've got to develop those skills and be more of that amoeba, right? Be more of that amoeba that can just kind of morph in that situation and look at it from a little bit higher level. Okay. But like I said, like if your athlete is nothing but if she's too mellow, right? If she's too mellow and she just looks like she's a little lethargic, then she's got to develop the tools to help get into that peak state so that she operates at her best. And the more an athlete plays and the more your daughter plays, she'll start to realize like, oh, I play my best when these things happen. Like and there's too many things to mention, Ellis, like to get the right. But the idea is like you're trying to get to your peak state. The thing is that peak state moves every day, and I learned that the hard way because I totally ruined like my national championships when I was young because I was doing the same thing, but mentally I was so hyped up to compete that I actually needed a set of skills that I didn't have at the time, and I didn't learn till much later, which was like, okay, how to basically regulate my um, my personality, my management, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Because up until that point, it was always about getting to peak state, like I was climbing a ladder, right? But at this point in my career, I was actually so excited to compete. I literally needed skills to learn how to climb down a ladder to get to that point. So I hope that makes sense. So as a parent, we may be one way, but the bottom and our athlete may be another way. But the point is that between the two of you is to learn the skills to come at it from all directions because it's not a light switch. We're not taking our athlete and saying ready, set, go. We're saying, all right, listen, today it's colder than usual, or today, you're going up against a competitor and they have these skills, and you're going to need to be more this or that. And so while it's the idea here is personality, it's also about that personality helps you develop some skills with which to survive and thrive in the current environment, right? So that's a great question, right? So, and Alice, just to finish, for all the parents listening, I think it's really important to embrace this idea that your kids, you have been gifted with a human being that is probably opposite to what you are. It's kind of like God's way of messing with you, right? It's like, oh, you're all fire, Ellis. Here you go. I'm gonna give you a daughter, and she's all water. Boom, there you go. Right, and you're like, come on, why aren't you more fire like me, right? And so you got to develop those skills, right? So I really think that's what life is all about. So yes, amoeba adapts and morph, and be that actor. Like I'll leave you with this one, Ellis, and everybody else is like, your athlete is really like an actor, and so if you're an actor and you're like a one trick pony, um, there was a guy with there was a guy who was a character on Saturday Night Live, and it was his last name was Kinane, I think. Saturday Night Live. Oh, hold on, let me see if I can find this because Kinane. Um, no, it's not coming up. No, I'm just getting Kellyanne Conway skits. Um, anyway, so there was this actor on Saturday Night Live, and he got typecast. And if I could find him, you totally remember him in a heartbeat. But he got typecast, and because he was only one type of actor, and then he continued to only be used in this one type of role. And meanwhile, like Jimmy Fallon could do all sorts of things, and now he's on the Tonight Show, right? And so our athletes need to be that actor, and it's like they're going into a game today or game day. It doesn't matter what the sport, and that game day is asking them to act a certain way. And the question is like, does your athlete have those skills to survive in that particular play, that particular moment? Because they have to develop and they have to adapt. And you think of like the best actors out there who've had very successful careers. You think of like, Tom Hanks. You think of uh, uh, who's the guy? He's actually playing Biden right now on Saturday Night Live. But anyway, he's a little bit stuck in one role, but people would say like, he can morph into a lot of ways. That's what we want from our athletes. Okay. So with that, I will leave you guys with that. If you enjoyed this, please do me a favor, leave me a like, a heart, and share this with an athlete, a parent, a coach who needs to hear it. If you're not a member already of our private Facebook group, Raising High Performance Athletes, please just search for that on Facebook, and you can join and answer the 3 questions. Tell me a little bit about yourself, and I'll let you in. And if you got a question for me, you can email me at coachedwards@athletespecific.com. And like I said, please head on over to Amazon and grab a copy of my book for your athlete for Christmas. It's called An Athlete's Guide to Winning in Sports and Life. And when you get it, leave me a review. That'd be great. And last but not least, I want to work with your athlete. Right? So I work with athletes on mental performance in a variety of sports all across North America and globally, which is kind of fun. And we work via Zoom, and I want to help take your athlete to the next level. So if that's something that's interesting to you, go to athletespecific.com/call, and you can book a breakthrough call. We'll get on the phone for about 45 minutes, talk about your athletes, see where they're stuck, get some clarity on where they want to go and how to get there. And then if we're a good fit, I might invite you to work together. But if not, that's cool too. But I want you guys to all have a very I want your kid to succeed. I want your athlete to succeed, right? Not just in sports, but in life. So good luck with that. And I'll see you guys next week. We're having a whole nother schwack of questions. And but thanks for everybody's input and the questions. And Ellis, thank you today. It was great. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Have a great night. Cheers.